2, 1. Let's go. Welcome to the Fiction Addiction Podcast, a podcast where we go one-on-one with fiction creators, such as authors, filmmakers, actors, songwriters, and more. Each episode, we get the inside scoop on our guests' creative process, the ups and downs of their industries, and our guests also give out tips and tricks that help them become successful. And now, let's jump into the episode with your host, Chris C.L. Lowry.
All right. Welcome back to the Fiction Addiction Podcast. Our next guest is a 35-year-old trans male from Spring, Texas. They have been married for more than 16 years. They have been working on their book series also for more than 16 years. They have worked with their mother on the first book, but unfortunately, their mother passed before the book could get published. Since then, our guest has dedicated everything they do to their mother. Ladies and gentlemen, Jamie Sonnier, what is going on?
Hi there.
Hey, thank you for joining us. Excited.
Thank you for having me.
First and foremost, what is the secret to having more than 16 years of marriage? I'm going to get that out the way.
Well, it's tough. There are plenty of ups and downs, but I think finding the right partner for you that completes you, not necessarily having everything in common with you. In my husband's case, he has almost nothing in common with me, and he completes the parts of me I find are missing, and I do the same for him.
Now, did you envision like being able to find that old school love? Because obviously our generation, we kind of like started dropping the ball somewhere along the line in terms of marriage. Like, you know what I mean? Our grandparents and even some of our parents had those 30 plus years, 40 plus years. So did you always know like that was the goal no matter what?
It was a hope for sure. I was never sure of if it would happen until a friend called me up and asked me to go on a blind date. That's how we met.
Really?
Yep. We were teenagers, and it was his senior year of high school, and he'd never been to a school dance. And a mutual friend of ours called me and asked me to go on this blind date with this guy to his school dance. So I agreed, and it was just an immediate connection.
Nice.
Yeah.
Y'all got to thank that friend. Like y'all forever indebted to that friend.
Oh, absolutely.
So now, currently, we are facing a global pandemic, the COVID-19 coronavirus. How has this pandemic, the quarantine, the stay-at-home orders issued by some states, how has that affected you in terms of your personal and professional life?
Well, unfortunately, I got laid off from my work as they had to shut down. Now, it's a temporary layoff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a temporary layoff. They'll reopen and they'll have us come back. But for the time being, I've been laid off. So I've been dedicating all of my time to advertising and trying to get my book out there.
Absolutely. Now, has this opened your eyes up in terms of, I don't want to say possibilities, because this is rare, obviously. This is something no one saw coming, no one expected to hit us this hard. And we had so many economical issues as a result of it. But as also an author and entrepreneur, has this opened up your eyes in terms of anything can happen in the 9-to-5 world? And like you said, now the focus is on promoting your book. Has it opened your eyes as an entrepreneur in terms of how you can move forward?
Absolutely. It's a concern because, you want to be able to do like your book signings and go out there and meet people and get the book on the shelves. But like, you can't do that right now.
Now, when did your passion for writing begin?
I'd say around the age of 7. right about when writing became a thing for me, right about when I started figuring out how to do it. And I wrote my first book unpublished. I wrote my first book when I was about 9.
Wow.
And then I did some writing in my school, and it may still be there. There's a copy of a short story I wrote that they had in a glass case at my middle school. So I had that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, how was that? Like having that story put into the case at the middle school. How was that feeling as a kid?
It was amazing. It was it was quite inspiring. Only 2 kids in the entire school got the privilege, and I was one of them.
Oh wow, it's
Yeah.
crazy. Now, from that point, and obviously from writing as a child to the point where you become a published author,
Mhm.
how did that evolution occur?
Well, like I didn't for like a long time didn't get into writing after my childhood. I had other things to focus on, high school and whatnot, and then I got married very young. And then the story was just a little blurb I thought about before I'd go to bed, and then it one day just evolved into this epic series. And I sat down and was like, you know what, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna start writing this. And my mother helped me quite a bit with it. Like, she was my ear. She would listen to all of my chapters and give me advice and notes. And she'd always wanted to be a writer herself. So, yeah.
Did she have any other stories or books that she worked on as well?
She had one story, which she didn't have a name for, but it was about a woman. I think she was a wedding, what do they call it? A wedding coordinator.
Oh yeah.
And it was a love story. It was a romance between a wedding coordinator and a wealthy gentleman. She was a big fan of Jane Austen's books. Pride and Prejudice was her baby. Mr. Darcy every day.
So once you came to her, I can't imagine being a parent with the passion of writing and then my child picking up interest in that same passion.
Mm-hmm.
How was that conversation like, the first one?
Oh, she always knew I wanted to be a writer, and she was always very supportive. Very, very, but she wasn't foolishly supportive. If it wasn't a good idea, if it didn't grab the interest, she'd let me know.
Which is what you need sometimes.
Absolutely. She helped me with a lot of rewording of the story and whatnot.
Now, the first book in this series, it is Building Neverland, Pan Rising.
That's it.
So I'm going to read the synopsis real quick. So in this dark adult reimagining of Peter Pan, Peter is thrust off the island violently only to land himself in a world of pirates. In this alternate tale, we will begin to discover the darker side to the Peter Pan story as Peter dives into the world of adults, piracy, kidnapping, and his journey towards becoming the great Captain Hook. Now, where obviously we know the interest came from, but where did the interest come in terms of recreating the story?
Well, I'd always been a big fan of Peter Pan, and I always, as a child, saw a connection between him and Hook. And as a little kid, I was certain that Hook was just another facet of Peter. And as I got older and my little blurb started to morph into a Peter Pan story, which it originally had nothing to do with, I had this thought, what if Peter was Captain Hook? And the story just unfolded before me.
Now, were you nervous about recreating such a classic tale?
Absolutely, I still am. Oh, yeah, that's a beloved story. There are going to be people out there who either love it or hate it.
And now, what would you say to those people? Because obviously, some people are going to just judge a book by its cover and say, "No, I don't want to." You know what I mean? Some people don't want
Mm-hmm.
it to ruin whatever
Mm-hmm.
history they have with the original stories. But at the same time, this story is very creative, and it takes you to another world, essentially, in terms of these characters in this tale. So, what would you say to a person like that who's just going to be judgmental and not take the chance to actually read it?
I'd say give it a chance. You never know. You might like it. I'm not asking people to like my book more than the original source. Of course not. But it's an alternate take on it. And I think it has a place in the story's history.
And now, while recreating this tale, what was your goal?
My goal? Well, it's a series, so my goal in the end was to give Peter a different take and a different light, and to open him up to far more understanding. You know, he, like in the story, in the series, he eventually becomes a married husband and a father and a grandfather and a great grandfather. And I've never seen that side to Peter outside of Hook, the movie Hook, where he became a father. And I thought, you know, mixing Peter and Hook would add a little bit of an extra amount of drama and detail to him as a father, as a husband, you know, as your neighbor.
Hmm. Now, your cover design, very creative, I must say.
Thank you.
For such a classic tale, obviously for the history of it, and also for your vision for the tale that you were telling. What was the process like in terms of finding the designer for your cover?
Well, initially I was going to draw the cover up myself, but I'm not the best of an artist, particularly digital art. I fell out of practice years ago from drawing, so I had it in my mind what I wanted. I knew exactly what I wanted as far as Peter and the image of him hovering over the water and whatnot. And so I put feelers out there into the world on a website, which I'm not going to name, but another website that I was on, asking these digital artists if anyone would be interested in doing the cover art. And I had a friend tell me, I've got a friend who does digital art who's pretty talented. Maybe you'd like to meet her. And so I agreed. And that's when I met Genevieve Hudspeth. And she just knew somehow. Like, I told her what I wanted in as much detail as possible, but I'm sure I fell short here and there, but she somehow knew exactly what I wanted, and she gave it to me, and I'm just so pleased with it.
Really? So what do you think the connection was? You know what I mean? In terms of, would you think it was a connection with her, with the story, with obviously your detail of it? What do you think made you guys mesh so well?
I think she's just a very good artist. She's very talented, and she knows how to give people what they're looking for. And like, as long as you can give her some details, she'll do her best.
So after you wrote the story, after you find your designer, your illustrator for the cover, what were the next steps you took in your publishing journey? Was this something you wanted to jumpstart a traditional publishing career, or did you always know you wanted to be independent?
I didn't disillusion myself into thinking that a traditional publication would automatically pick up my book. The dream was to have Little Brown and Company do it, but of course they don't accept amateur work. And so I started querying to agents, and of course I got turned down left and right. And then I went to a website, which I don't recall the name of, but I put my name and like my email address and like what the book was about and everything on it. And I got contacted by Author House. and they were the ones that picked me up. I had a few publishing houses that wanted me, like Dorrance and another that I can't quite think of at the moment. But they were a bit expensive.
Why? What made you choose Author House over the other publishers? What were you looking for as an artist?
They published Legally Blonde. That was enough for me. I love Legally Blonde. That was plenty for me. Like the second he said that, I was like, "It's you."
You're right. So, how has your experience been since publishing book one?
It's been eye-opening, both a whirlwind and stationary. And I'll explain what I mean by that is when I first published, I published through Amazon, which is it's still up, but it was my own editing and everything on it. And it sold a few copies the first week, and then it just stopped selling. Mm-hmm. And when I had been writing, I kept telling myself, all I need to do is get my book on Amazon and it'll take off. My advice to anyone listening, don't think that, because it takes a lot more than just publish, which Amazon makes it very easy. They make it very easy to publish your book, but it's not enough. You have to advertise and you have to get out there and do more for it than just accepting that Amazon will take care of everything and that people will automatically know how to find you. Like if I type in Neverland into Amazon search bar, my book does not show up.
Now, how many books total are going to be in the series?
7.
7 books.
I'm hoping to dwindle it down to 6, but so far as the conceptualizing has gone, it's 7.
And what made you want to do a series rather than just a standalone? Now, obviously, sometimes the pen takes a life of its own, and you can't control the book.
It does. Basically, all of these characters started coming to my mind, and I realized I can't fit all of this into one book. So then one book became 2 books, 2 books became 3, and then after a while, it turned out to be 7. Initially, at one point, it was up to 13 books, but I managed to cull the field a little bit and try to minimize it some.
Now, for your first release, did you have a launch party? How did you introduce your book as your first book into the world?
No launch party. I just posted on Facebook, hey guys, I published my book. And then my publishing agent was like, you need a bigger social media presence. So get on Twitter, get on Instagram. And I'd had a Twitter since 2014, but I never posted on it, not once.
Right.
So I went back to that and I was like, all right, we're going to figure this out. Rolled up my sleeves and started contacting Twitter's writing community, and they've been amazing.
Yeah, I was about to ask that. How is the writing community for you?
Oh, they're
on
fantastic.
Social media. There's so many. There's so many on Facebook, so many on Twitter, a few on Instagram. So how has it been?
Fantastic. They're such great people. They're clever and creative and always helpful. I had sent out feelers for help on, I needed advice on people who fight like in MMA and jiu-jitsu, law enforcement, things like that, for a specific character in the future book in the series. And I had several people contact me, and they were wonderful. They gave me the best advice that I think I could have found anywhere, and really helped me shape this character.
Now that's interesting, because not too many people, especially when they're starting out writing, not too many people think about that. So what you did was you actually did the research for your character. Why was that important?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important to me to keep it because it's such a fantastical story. I've got to have some realism here and there, so I can't have a bare knuckle brawler who's never trained in his life or eats Twinkies all day, or well, I needed to know what the diet would be like, what exactly he'd be, exercising, cardio and the like, how many hours a day, how many years it would take him to become the best, things like that. So, yeah.
do you do that type of research for every character?
No. Some characters I don't need to research. They're just who they are, and it's not necessary. But for some characters, like for instance, Blackbeard is in the first book, and I wanted to get as close as possible to his, like, how he died and the like. So I had to do a lot of research on that. But yeah, a lot of the research that I do for these characters is extensive. And I ask a lot of people's advice on the matter, people who know better than me.
Right. Now, were you ever surprised by some of the information you received during your research, especially like the MMA and how stringent some of those routines are and some of that training is? Some of it's extreme.
Oh,
absolutely.
absolutely.
You know what I mean? So were you ever surprised listening to some of the people's information? Like, really? You do that?
Oh, yeah. One guy told me that my character would have to imbibe at least a dozen eggs a day, at the very least, to keep up his physique. I was like,
oh, my God.
I know. I couldn't believe it. It was like, a dozen eggs? Really? He's like, it's good protein.
Oh my God, that's crazy. I hope it wasn't like one of those guys that like drink it, like drink the raw eggs.
Oh, I know. I think I'm going to have the character boil the eggs.
Right. Now, in terms of tapping into your imagination, because obviously this is you're creating worlds. This is that fantasy realm.
Mm-hmm.
What is the key to tapping into your imagination to create a world, even though it's based off of Peter Pan and Neverland? You still have to do the creation for your tale. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you tap in to that type of imagination, creativity?
I've always had an exceedingly vivid imagination, like ridiculously vivid. And like, I don't quite know how I've been able to tap into it. It just comes naturally for me. I don't have to think for too long to come up with an idea for the story. So I'm not quite sure how I could advise there.
What is your writing routine?
It's nothing big. I just sit down and dedicate 12 plus hours per night to working on it.
At a time in one setting?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, per night.
12 hours?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I've edited and re-edited that first book probably over 500 times.
What was that first edit draft like for you?
Oof, quite embarrassing. I'm so glad that I edited. It was much shorter, for one. I was worried that it wasn't going to come out to like a full-size book at first, because I can write the beginning, I can write the middle, I can write the end, but the small talk in between those spaces, I tend to struggle with, and small talk in general when it comes to dialogue. But it's been an experience trying to get it done and get it edited and re-edited. And I was on Wattpad for a full year straight working on the book. And I did read for reads for people, like where you read theirs and they read yours and you both give feedback.
Right.
And once I hit 1,000 views and feedback, that's when I said, okay, it's time to publish.
Really? You had 1,000 views on your story on Wattpad?
1,000 reads, yep.
How was that site for you in terms of navigating and putting your story out there?
It's a little confusing at first, especially the forums section. If you don't know what you're doing, you will sit there and wonder, why can't I post in this forum? Why can't I make a forum post of my own? But you've
Right.
got to do things like you've got to read forum posts and click like on forum posts to unlock things. So once I started to gradually figure that out, it became quite easy. It's a very good website.
Now, are you still on Wattpad, or did you just do the year? Did you do a year and then?
Oh, I'm still on there. I've
Oh,
got the
okay.
second book on there and a few other books that I'm working on as well.
How was the initial feedback from family, like your family members, when you published your book and you actually became a published author?
All positive, which worried me.
What?
You know,
Why?
nothing but positive feedback. Somebody's got to be lying. There's got to be at least one of you out there who doesn't like this book. That just picks it up and goes, "Oh no, this is not for me." Like someone's got to, but everybody's like, "Oh, it's perfect, it's great," and that worries me.
Now, what was your reaction when you had your first official printed copy in your hands?
Ah, that was amazing. Like, I screwed up the format of it because you're going to laugh. Somebody told me that the formatting that I was using was hard for people who had, what's it called? Jesus, what's that called? The condition where they see letters switched around and whatnot.
Dyslexic.
Dyslexia.
Yeah.
Yeah, they told me to reformat it so that dyslexic people could, read it easier. So I did and published the book that way. And I had so many people come to me and go, "Why'd you use that format?"
Wait, so people asked about the new format when you reformatted it?
Yeah, like why did you format it that way? Because I didn't indent the paragraphs and I put a space in between each paragraph. So it looks a little strange. Now the book, now that it's at Barnes and Nobles, has been edited and it's formatted correctly. But I think I was given some bad advice initially.
Really?
Yeah.
I about to say, what was their, like, what was their experience of, is that the way they did their books in terms of
I don't know.
formatting it?
I didn't see their book. They just, several people told me to put spaces in between because the long formatting where your eye doesn't get a rest was difficult for people with
Right.
dyslexia who struggle to read. So that I wanted to be as inclusive as possible. So I did that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if it truly helped. It might have been poor advice, but I did what I could.
Yeah, you put the effort in.
Yeah.
No, I'm going back to your writing routine. 12
Mhm.
hours, Jesus.
Mhm.
I need that type of discipline. Do you write? Are you one of those writers that use pen and pad and then transfer over to typing, or do you type from the beginning?
I type from the beginning. I don't write so well. My handwriting isn't the best, and for some reason I tend to grip the pen as hard as I can in my hand. I don't know why. I've always been that way. Like I've snapped pens in my hand while writing.
Wow.
Yes, so I tend to avoid writing physically unless I'm just like signing my signature or something. So
Yeah.
it's all, and I'm a very proficient typer. So I type over 100 words per minute. So it works out better that way. I write too
Yeah.
slowly. So
Now, how do you stay dedicated? Because that is dedication. How do you stay dedicated to putting in that much time to writing?
it's my baby.
Especially with so many distractions in the world. You know what I mean?
Oh, I know. Well, for one, I was a shut-in for 10 years for a while in my 20s, my late
Mm-hmm.
20s. So I had nothing but time. I worked from home, I answered phones, and I wrote. And the story, it's my baby. It's a piece of my soul. So it's easy to care about something and dedicate a lot of time to it when it's a piece of you.
Mm. Now, do you see yourself, or do you write in different genres?
I do. I have, other than the Peter Pan series, I'm writing 2 other books. Both are comedies. One's a dark comedy, one's a basic comedy. The dark comedy is, do you want to know what it's about?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, it's called Best Frenemies, and it's about an app that appears overnight on everyone's phones around the world, and nobody knows where it came from or how to delete it, and it promises to find your soulmate. So for serial killer Tobias, he decides to utilize it, and while everyone else around him is getting great matches, some even celebrities, he gets Ethan, this overweight, bearded, middle-aged mama's boy who collects wiener dogs and wiener dog accessories. So in his disappointment, he goes to kill Ethan, only to realize too late he's been drugged by him. And he wakes up later in Ethan's basement, only to find the app worked far too well. That Ethan is also a serial killer and is demanding they be best friends.
Wow.
And the other comedy is Gemini Wanted, and it's a Western, an old comedic Western about these twin half Native American brothers who bungled their way through a bank robbery, only for rumor to spread out of control that it isn't 2 idiots who got lucky, but one lone phantom gunman who can appear in 2 places at once.
Mm. Yeah, your creativity is like on a different level.
Thank you.
Now, how do you navigate through those different genres in terms of not writing from here to here physically, but actually staying focused on one genre at a time? Or do you stay focused? Are you one of those writers that can write one thing on a Sunday and then go to the comedy on a Monday and then be just fine?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely that one. I'll get up early in the morning and start work on a new chapter for, Building Neverland, and then give it a few hours of rest, and then I go to Best Frenemies,
Really?
and then I work on, like in one day I can pump out at least a chapter per book.
That's crazy. It's not easy for everybody. You know what I mean? They get stuck in the one book for weeks, months at a time. Like, you know what I mean? So that's good. That's
I
a
know.
positive thing.
I've never had writer's block in my life.
Ever.
Not once. If I sit down to write something, I know exactly what I'm writing. It comes out.
Wow. Like made for this.
It upsets a lot of my other writer friends who do suffer writer's block.
It's going to upset a lot of listeners too. Like, what the
I'm sure.
Like 16 plus years of marriage and doesn't get writer's block.
Nope. Never had it. In my entire life, I've never had writer's block. I have the opposite problem. I have far too many ideas. In one given scenario, I can come up with 6 different methods and ways that the scenario could happen or more. And then my problem is deciding on which scenario is the best one to go with. So I have way too much information going into my brain at once. So there's just no time for writer's block.
Now, what is one tip you would give? Because obviously you have so much creativity, so much discipline when it comes to writing. What is one tip you would give an inspiring writer who has good ideas, great ideas, but doesn't know where to start in terms of generating their story or pursuing their publishing career?
I would say if you're a writer and you want to write a book, Don't do it intoxicated. That is my number one tip I give people. Don't do it. Like, it may seem like a good idea at the time, but you're going to wake up to a lot of nonsense.
Oh, that's the truth.
Plus, it's so easy to get distracted when you're intoxicated. Like, if I have a single beer, I can't write. Like, that's it.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Just focus on everything else. And it's crazy because sometimes, depending on the drinker and what you're drinking, so many things start running through your head. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But like you said, it's hard to focus.
I'd say to take, if you're the type that drinks and gets creative, take ample notes. But don't dedicate the writing, like when you sit down to actually really seriously write, be very careful what you drink or smoke or what have you, because it can become a distraction.
Oh, absolutely. Now, one thing I noticed, obviously from the comedies you were describing to us,
Mm-hmm.
the diversity
Mm-hmm.
in the characters, it sounded like.
Thank you.
What was going on there in terms of planning for those books and planning for those characters, even with your series now? Why was diversity important for you?
It's very important because I wanted to include a lot of people of color and LGBTQ plus as well. Like, in all of my books, these are prevalent. Like, Tobias, the serial killer, and Best Frenemies, the sociopath, is African American. In my Pan Rising book, I've got a trans character, I've got gay characters, I've got lesbian characters, I've got black characters, I've got Hispanic, like, in my story, there is no sexism, there is no racism, there's no bigotry, there is classism. They do have
classism everywhere.
Yeah, they do have classism, but like, Peter's wife, for example, in book 3, you find out Peter's wife, she's African American. Well, she's from Neverland, so African Neverland, you would say. Inclusivity is just very important to me. And being trans myself, it's important to me that people have a voice and have a place in fiction, like for a while you didn't see people of color as superheroes, and now that's changed, and that's a wonderful thing. I think that it should be prevalent in most new stories.
I was about to ask you that. Do you believe we have enough representation for everybody around?
At the moment, no. I don't think there is enough representation. I think that the world could do much better for representation, for representing people of color, people in LGBTQ, women, etc. I think that we could do a lot better for representation. And I'm not sitting here dogging on cis white people, not whatsoever. I think that they should be represented too, but they have been.
Do we have enough, are enough writers, diverse writers getting opportunities? Are enough LGBT authors given enough opportunities from publishing companies and from readers to get those stories out there? The same with people of different races.
I certainly hope so. I'd like to see there being more representation, more people given the chance to tell their stories, the people who are in LGBTQ or who are people of color, I want to see them be able to succeed in telling their story however they wish to tell it.
Now, for your stories, what is your vision in terms of the possibilities you have with them? Because obviously with the comedies, those easily, just that little bit you told us, those can easily be, especially Best Frenemies. That could I could easily see that as an actual visual production. So,
thank you.
Have you ever considered anything like that in the future for any of your stories?
It's always been a hope, but as narcissistic as I am, I've never been narcissistic enough to believe that my story would ever become like a movie or a TV show, but like it's always been a hope.
Really?
Yeah, I would love to see somebody's take on my story, even if like even if they screw it up, it's still somebody else's take and it's an amazing thing to see.
Right. Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That one, that can definitely, absolutely, easily be a hit right now. You might need a visual artist to create like an app or something like that for visual effects. But other than that, it should be easy.
I had to do so much research on the apps thing because I had to name it something that wasn't already taken. And originally it was called Second Self. But then I found that was an app. So I was like, oh, I can't do that. So now
oh gosh,
I had to change it to Second Spirit, which wasn't ideal, but like I can't take somebody else's name. So
exactly. I can imagine how hard that was because obviously you don't know how many apps exist until you start searching for a name.
Oh yeah, they pump them out per day, like by the minute. So for all I know, Second Spirit's already an app. Then I'll have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, and then make you pick another name.
Oh, that would suck.
Now, for you, obviously you published your book. You have so many great stories coming out on the way. That first book, because it meant so much to you,
Mm-hmm.
because your mother helped you work on it. How important was it to get it published?
It was absolutely important. Her favorite of my stories was Gemini Wanted, the Western, but she did like Building Neverlands, and she helped me quite a bit with it. So it was in honor of her memory. I had to see it through. I'm one of those people that's probably never finished anything in his life. So I had to prove this not only to myself, but to like my little world around me that I could see something through and show my mother in her death that, I can do it. So it was exceedingly important to me.
And what is next for your books, your series, obviously the comedies? What is next? What is next? What can we expect from it?
Book 2 for Building Neverland, for one, Hook Rising. That's when Peter actually does become, like, you see him merging into Hook somewhat in the first book, but in the second one, that's when he really becomes Hook. It's when he loses his hand and everything else. So the second book is what I'm working on as of this time, and I'm hoping to have that out next year.
What can we expect from you? Anything else? Any big news coming from you besides the writing?
No, not much news for me as of this time. I'm just hoping to get my job back. But,
yeah, absolutely. We hope you get it back.
Yeah, but other than writing the books, they take up my life. So as of this time, I have nothing else that I'm working on that I can really say.
Have you ever? I got a question. Have you ever thought about co-authoring a book?
Not really. It's hard for me to share. I like I've had friends actually help me rewrite stuff, and it takes me a lot to put it into the book because they, added their own narrative to it and whatnot. Yeah, I've had a few friends just, word it this way instead. It'll be better. It'll be better. And this stubbornness in me says, but it's not mine,
Right,
I have a severe aversion to taking other people's work. So.
And why do you think that is?
I don't know. Like, I just was taught that if somebody else wrote it, it's theirs. And if you claim it, that's plagiarism. the big P, and I
just stuck by that there.
Oh yeah, I stuck by it hard. Now I'll take, like, if they say change a single word here and there or whatever, but if they completely restructure it, I can't do it. I can't, even if it's better, I can't take it because it's not mine.
Right. So what do you? I'm about to say, and they had to keep up with your 12 hours of dedication. You're like outright somebody, like you'll be done so much, and they'll be like. So now, can you tell everybody where they can reach you at, where they can find your book at, and get in contact with you?
Absolutely. I'm on Twitter under Sonnier85. If you type in Building Neverland or J.M. Sonnier, you'll find it. Blue book cover. It's also on Amazon. If you type in J.M. Sonnier, you'll find it. Let's see. My Instagram is whatajoy85. And that's about it.
All right. This is the Fiction Addiction Podcast, and this was Jamie Sonnier. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the Fiction Addiction Podcast. Make sure you visit fictionaddictionpodcast.com for links on everything we talked about today, as well as awesome resources, additional tips, and Fiction Addiction merchandise.